Divine Pulse, or Milla's Turnwheel as it was called in FE15, may be the most divisive addition to Fire Emblem ever. Some will say it is a great addition to the strategy game, while others will say it ruins the strategic integrity of Fire Emblem. So, which is it? Is Divine Pulse a genius innovation, or is it lazy design? Let's talk about it. Since its inception, Fire Emblem has always been about stress-inducing decisions. Every move, every attack, every item used had some risk associated with it. If you move there, you might get swarmed by enemies. If you attack that enemy, you might be on the receiving end of a critical hit. If you use that item, you may wish you had it later. The point is, everything you did had some sort of consequence, and to many, this is the most important aspect of Fire Emblem. With the advent of Casual Mode, Phoenix Mode, Milla's Turnwheel, and now Divine Pulse, those stress-inducing moments are becoming fewer and farther in between. Divine Pulse allows you to undo your mistakes. There is next to no reason, aside from running out of pulses, to live with any misgivings your choices stick you with. Now, the argument could be made that this is optional, or just don't use it. However, the developers knew all too well that the player would have access to Divine Pulse. Let's look at some examples of when this was the case in Three Houses. In Chapter 5, the player is tasked with eliminating the boss. It requires the player to run all their characters in a big circle while dispatching enemies. Everything is pretty simple until you place a unit towards the north end of the map. Enemy reinforcements who have passed some pretty scary stats on Maddening appear right behind the unit you moved farthest, and most likely right in range of your squishy backline units. Without prior knowledge of these enemy reinforcements, the player will most likely be making use of that handy Divine Pulse feature the devs count on. Chapter 6 has two different win conditions: rout the enemy besides the boss, or defeat the boss. It seems pretty straightforward until you enter the room on the east side of the map. This is where enemies literally appear out of nowhere. Again, without prior knowledge, you are bound to get caught in a situation that requires you to use a Divine Pulse. The final example I will bring up is in Chapter 13 of Azure Moon, Verdant Wind, and Silver Snow. I don't think anyone would disagree with me when I say that map is pretty mean, and without Divine Pulse it would be even more frustrating than it already is. Tons of strong enemies, no battle preps, your in-house units are all spread out and force deployed regardless of their level. Chances are at least one or two of those units aren't quite up to snuff. Divine Pulse feels absolutely necessary to clear this map without some intense prep and planning. Do you see what I mean when I say it isn't optional? The maps are built in a way that rewards trial and error, but any error in Three Houses, i.e. character death, is so severely punished by the extremely small and unavailable cast of the game. If you let someone die, replacing them is hardly an option, and if they die in Part 2, there are no new units to recruit at that point. Three Houses is designed in a way that recognizes the player has Divine Pulse and forces them to use it. But, counter-argument. Is it inherently a bad thing that a game be designed with a time rewind mechanic to fix mistakes? No, not at all. In fact, some might say it is a fun twist on the Fire Emblem formula. If we look at Divine Pulse as a resource the player needs to spend wisely, similar to items or experience management, it makes some of the game's design choices seem more fair and honestly pretty clever. So let's look at a previous example and look at it with this new perspective in mind. At the time you play Chapter 5, you will probably have 4 and at most 5 Divine Pulses. If you fall for that enemy reinforcements trap, then you have a Divine Pulse to spend to better prepare for that trap. That leaves you with 3 more pulses, that I would say are meant to be spent on the boss of the chapter because he has a relatively high crit rate and high attack power. If something bad happens there, you can rewind and fix your mistake. Maybe I'm giving the devs a little too much credit here, but you could argue that the developers kept your pulse count in mind when creating maps. In this aspect, I don't think Divine Pulse is necessarily bad. It isn't a tool that the developers created so they could be lazy, it is a new resource that the player needs to learn how to manage properly. The other complaint I see lobbied against Divine Pulse is that it reduces the weight of your choices. If you can just erase your mistakes, then does anything really matter? This argument ignores all of the other decisions that need to be made in Three Houses. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance introduced the base, an area that the player had to access between battles, where you could train units, forge weapons, and equip skills. This is our first major example of having really important actions to take outside of battle. Who should get the bonus experience? Which unit should receive what skill? What weapon should I forge? These questions carried similar weight to that of moving units on the battlefield in that they were permanent and game-changing. We have seen this base evolve over the years into what we now have in 3 houses. How will you spend weekends? Which students should you teach? What should you teach them? Who should I recruit? What weekend activities should we do? What proficiencies does Byleth need to work on? Do I need to grind in an auxiliary battle? Would a seminar be beneficial now? What 3 houses misses in terms of strategy and anxiety in battle due to Divine Pulse, it more than makes up for in all the extracurriculars that take place outside of battle. 3 houses marks a shift in the series. Battles are merely speed bumps that are checks to make sure that you are doing all the other stuff the game has to offer correctly. While that might be a bit extreme to say now, we might be looking at one of the last games in the series, barring remakes, that puts an emphasis on the battles rather than the day-to-day happenings of running and training an army. Is this a good change for Fire Emblem? From a veteran's perspective, probably not, but it sells really well to the general audience. Just look at Animal Crossing. That game took over the world this past year. It has next to no stakes, no major risks. Mario Odyssey is another example. If you die in that game, you lose 10 coins. Breath of the Wild too. The game is constantly auto-saving for you. If you die, you barely lose any progress. For Fire Emblem, the way of handling this appeal to a general audience is casual mode, Divine Pulse, and focusing on the aspects outside of battle. So again, is this a good shift for the series? Is Divine Pulse genius innovation or is it lazy design? Let us know in the comments. And make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Also, if you wouldn't mind sharing this video on social media or with your friends, that would be pretty great. Anyways, thanks for watching and have a great day.